Welcome to In the Cut, the show that gets you up close and personal with BN and our community. And now, here is your host, Kevon Cameron.
Good afternoon. Welcome to In the Cut, the show that gets you up close and personal with BN, our community happenings, and everything going on with the Black Nonbelievers. I am Kevon Cameron, your host. I'm the lead organizer of Black Nonbelievers of New York. This show is a production of Black Nonbelievers. It's a 501c3 organization headquartered in the Atlanta area. We connect Blacks and others and allies who are living free of religion and might otherwise be shunned by their family, friends, by providing friendly, informative community. Instead of accepting dogma, we determine truth and morality through reason and evidence. The mission of Black Nonbelievers, of course, is to provide secular fellowship, nurture and support non-believers in coming out, encourage pride in non-religious identities, educate the public on the history and current state of non-belief in the Black community, and of course, organize for charitable events. BN welcomes all regardless of age, gender identity, sexual identity, national origin, racial identity. However, our content and work prioritizes Black non-religious voices. With that, I'd like to welcome the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, Mandisa Thomas. How's it going, Mandisa?
Pretty good. I am currently here in the New York, Houston area. I'm not New York. Almost messed that up. But no, I am in Houston preparing for an event tomorrow with the Houston Oasis. And I am currently broadcasting live from Will Judy's place. You know, we've had him on the show before. You know, he's an amazing organizer here in the Houston area. We just love Will to pieces. If you have not seen the episode which featured him, please do check it out. And having a really, really good day today, really good weekend. Really excited about today's guest, one of my sisters in this movement. Really, really excited to have her on and for you all to hear what she has to say. And before we begin, I really, really want to thank everyone who supported our summer fundraiser. We actually exceeded our goal in less than 10 days. However, I would like to remind everyone that it's never a bad time to support Black Nonbelievers and the work we do, because it is very important. It is very, very crucial to what we do as far as featuring programs like this, helping to sustain our meetup groups, and really being able to provide the outreach that we do, which includes the Hurston Scholarship that is that is produced, co-sponsored with the Secular Student Alliance. So we really do have a lot going on here at BN, and we really, really thank you all for your support and participation, and we hope to continue to earn your support and participation. And I would like to really start sharing the information about the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference, which takes place from September 30th to October 2nd in Chicago, Illinois. However, we will be streaming it online. So if you go to the website, wocbeyondbelief.com, you can register for either in person or to stream, and you can also sponsor, or if you belong to an organization that would be interested in sponsoring this very, very important event, we definitely encourage you to do so. And I really, really just want to thank everyone else who has so far. This is another very crucial event that we produce along with Black Skeptics and the Women's Leadership Project, and it highlights the voices of women of color in this movement who are doing some very, very good and important work, and who often don't get the recognition that they deserve. Now, some of the faces you see here, you have seen on In the Cut before, and we would love to have you come and hear them in person in Chicago, or streaming like we do in more in-depth presentations It is very, very worthwhile to support it. So please do take a look and register and support when we share the links in the chat. So while we have a few moments to wait for our guests to come in, I'll take it back to Kevon in case you have a few more words for us before we begin.
Definitely. I'd just like to throw my reminder in there for the summer fundraiser. It's very critical. None of this happens without money, unfortunately. So if you can, like Mandisa said, there's several ways to donate. So check that out on the BlackNonbelievers website. And of course, like she said, Women of Color is coming up. I will be there if you're interested at all in meeting me. I will be there. I doubt that's why you're coming to the conference, but I'll be there to support. And we also have the cruise coming up in November. Want to remind people of that as well. I will also be there in shorts, so join us for that.
Nice. And there was someone who asked in the chat, is there a group for men of color, which I find very interesting. This is a special event. It is a special production called Women of Color Beyond Belief. So, but however, if there is an initiative that you would like to start where you think that men of color could specifically benefit, I think that would be a good thing to do if you are so inclined. We don't just, there are things that you might, if you think that there's a need for it, build it. We would love to have the movement is already full of male voices, many of which we can appreciate, and we encourage more people to provide more content. And if you check the show's history since we got started in earlier this year, I think we've had a fair mixture of gender representation during the show. So, but the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference is especially important because we do look to highlight those voices of the women in particular, whether they identify as cisgendered or transgendered. So, and also if they identify as queer, which is very, very important to us. So, with all of that being said, we do encourage people to volunteer with us and participate, especially if there is an affiliate near you. We cannot do this work alone. It does need your support and participation. So you can visit our website to learn more about how to volunteer, how to get involved, and also lend your support, not just for Black non-believers, but also any other group that's in your area, because our communities do not sustain themselves and survive without your support and participation. And that is something that we highly encourage people to do. So it looks like we're still waiting on Sikivu to join us this afternoon. So, and yes, the conference is come one, come all. We encourage everyone to come out and listen to the women that are involved and who will be speaking. And at this point, I will turn it over to Kevon to introduce our special guest.
Thanks, Mandisa. I appreciate it. So now that we are into the show, I would like to introduce our very special guest for today, Sikivu Hutchinson. Sikivu Hutchinson is the founder and executive director of Black Skeptics Los Angeles and of the Women's Leadership Project, a Black feminist mentoring and civic engagement program for girls of color in South Los Angeles high schools. She is also the author of several literary works, including the 2020 release Humanists in the Hood, an unapologetically Black feminist and heretical, and the play Narcolepsy, Inc., which premiered at the 2018 Hollywood Fringe Festival. Her book Moral Combat, released in 2011, is the first book on atheism to be published by an African-American woman. Sikivu is one of the 5 fierce humanists featured on the cover of the July-August 2018 issue of the Humanist magazine, and is one of the co-producers of Women of Color Beyond Belief, coming up this September. She's also a recipient of the 2020 Harvard Humanist of the Year Award, along with Ujimo Olou and Mandisa Thomas, of course, the Secular Student Alliance Backbone Award in 2016, and named Secular Women's 2013 Woman of the Year. So with that, welcome, Sikivu Hutchinson.
Hello.
Hello, it's nice to have you. I originally met you back in 2019, the first Women of Color conference. It's great seeing you since. I saw you play a little bit of guitar at the last one while Mandisa sang. It was really cool. As we're going to start it out the same way we start with all our interviews, want to get a bit of a background on you. So tell us a bit about your journey through religion and non-belief, how that came to be.
Yeah, I'm something of an outlier insofar as I grew up in a family that was principally secular. My parents did not explicitly identify themselves that way. They didn't identify themselves as atheists or humanists, but certainly they encouraged skepticism about dogma and religious indoctrination. There were no Bibles, there were no Qurans, there were no Talmuds in the household. We had extended family who were very much steeped in Methodist denominations. And so I would go to church with those extended family members, much to my chagrin. But there was no, like I said, religious indoctrination. And I'm very grateful of that. Now, it's important to contextualize that anomaly status vis-a-vis what was happening in my community when I was coming up. And we're talking about the early 70s into the 80s, growing up in South LA, which is a very religious community, churches on every street corner, ranging from storefront churches to mid-sized churches to mega churches. And so that was very much the osmotic experience, if you will, that I had growing up. I also, unfortunately, was put into Catholic school when I was in 9th grade, and that was something of a baptism, excuse the pun, by fire, in terms of really being castigated and vilified as a nonconformist African-American girl who was questioning, who was pushing back against religious dogma and respectability politics and white supremacy, all of which were very much part of the culture of that particular school and its political hierarchies. So that, in a nutshell, was my early journey. I started identifying actively as an atheist around that time, 9th grade. And I had a friend who identified as agnostic, and so we bonded. But very much like many young African Americans, getting the talk, getting the cultural propaganda about getting good with God and staying prayed up and being demonized for questioning and for being skeptical and for having a different view of gender hierarchies and sexuality in the community.
Okay, definitely. Yeah, so I don't know you super well, but one of the few things that I do know about you, other than your professional career, is that, I mean, including your professional career, but is that you're unapologetically Black, unapologetically pro-woman, and unapologetically pro-LGBTQ. With that said, what should more people understand about the recent Supreme Court decisions and how they directly affect Black, Indigenous, and women of color specifically, and sort of the ramifications for other groups going forward?
So what we're seeing now is a wholesale Christian fascist incursion, backlash, and deracination of our human and civil rights. We have a number of extremely insidious SCOTUS cases, as everyone knows, that have come down, principally Dobbs, which of course overturned the constitutional right to abortion. it's important to underscore that abortion rights need to be framed within the broader umbrella of reproductive justice, that African American women, Latinx women, and Indigenous women spearheaded the concept of reproductive justice to really frame it vis-a-vis the economic circumstances that African American women and other women of color experience under white supremacist, heterosexist, racial apartheid. So it's not just a matter of abortion rights being upended across the nation and being thrown back to the states. It's a matter of access. It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of having the right to self-determine, whether it comes to building a family in a community that has sustainable transportation, that has sustainable housing, that has sustainable access to reproductive health care, that has sustainable access to education. These are all issues that are at core in the overturning of Roe v. Wade. In California, for example, which is virtually a sanctuary state for abortion care, we've had a number of policies that have emerged to enshrine the right to abortion care and reproductive health, enshrine the right to abortion medication, and enshrine the right to having a free and unfettered surgical abortion, in addition to contraception. So these are all at core in California. We have folks, obviously, in the Midwest and in the South, in those 26 states that have imposed or in the process of imposing abortion bans, that are going to be a quagmire and a hellhole for working class African American women, middle class African American women, women across the class spectrum who come from BIPOC communities, because we have low rates of generational wealth. We have low rates of access, again, to quality, affordable, and accessible health care. We have high rates of maternal mortality. African American women, as many viewers and listeners know, have some of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the nation. It is more dangerous in many instances to give birth than it is to get an abortion. And that has been proven empirically and ironclad time and time again. So circling back to your question, that's a landmark ruling, which is going to have a catastrophic effect on the quality of life, on the bodily autonomy, on economic justice, and conditions of attempting to redress racial apartheid in communities of color. We also have a number of other rulings that are seriously eroding church-state separation. So I'm thinking specifically about the ruling that came down that would allow private religious institutions to receive public funding. That has been the linchpin issue for the radical religious right since time immemorial. And that stems back to their insidious efforts to enshrine or re-enshrine school segregation and to impose theocracy on public education. And public education is very much under attack. I mean, we see it with the winnowing of the curriculum vis-a-vis critical race theory, vis-a-vis LGBTQ affirming curricula, vis-a-vis bargaining and collective organizing among teachers, particularly teachers of color. There's been a wholesale exodus of African American teachers from K through 12 public schools as a condition of a number of these policies. So we have public education under attack. We have church-state separation under attack. We also have indigenous rights under attack with this latest ruling that's come down that's called Oklahoma versus Castro, that is undermining the right of indigenous authorities to exercise power and control when it comes to prosecuting folks that commit crimes on indigenous lands. That right has been taken away from indigenous governments. So all of these things signify that we are going to, excuse the pun and the figurative reference, hell in a handbasket when it comes to the rollback of critical civil and human rights for BIPOC folks.
Yeah, it's very regressive. The way we seem to be just going backwards. It's a coordinated effort to undo the gains that more secular, more progressive people have made. And I think we all look at the news and we look at what's happening and we think this is horrible. In your opinion, as an organizer, as someone who's out there, what do you think we could be doing to stop these efforts to take away our rights that we're not currently doing?
Well, I think that we are doing a number of things. I mean, certainly there is a push for reparations for African Americans. I mean, just confronting the wholesale, again, deracination of Black economic self-determination is critically important. We have a situation where, when it comes to home buying in this nation, that we are pre-Brown v. Board, vis-a-vis Black millennials being able to access capital to buy homes. We're faced with a situation where traditionally African American communities are being whittled away, for traditionally African American middle class communities. So, for example, in South LA, bedrock African American communities like Leimert Park and Inglewood and Baldwin Hills and Windsor Hills are facing catastrophic gentrification. You have folks that cannot afford mortgages, folks that are being displaced and evicted, folks that are being imposed upon by financial predatory lending, by subprime lending, by these disproportionate rates of being dispossessed due to the sunsetting of eviction provisions that were implemented during the pandemic. And so it's really a perfect storm for African Americans when we're talking about multi-generational wealth and tying that dynamic to the educational apartheid that's occurring in K through 12 public and private schools. So back to your question, what should we be doing? Pressing for reparations. We should absolutely be attempting to push back against these draconian, theocratic, reproductive rights backlashes. When it comes to, in California, there's an effort to enshrine the right to abortion care, as I mentioned before, in the Constitution. That's going to be put on the ballot for November. Here locally in South LA, through the Standing for Black Girls Coalition, we have been collaborating with Planned Parenthood Los Angeles and the Board of Supervisors and the Department of Public Health and Mental Health to try and put well-being centers and reproductive mobile health care units into South LA campuses. And unfortunately, that got waylaid by the overturn of Roe. I mean, even in this oasis state of California. So there are a number of things that we can do on the ground to try and subvert this draconian backlash against human and civil rights. Yeah, certainly BlackNonbelievers and the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference and all of the other BIPOC women's organizations that are pushing for social justice across the nation are part of that equation.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the reparations part, because I was just at dinner on Thursday with two friends of mine that I know from BlackNonbelievers, and we had this conversation about reparations, and they were very skeptical about it, which is very interesting because I wasn't born here, and I wouldn't benefit from reparations, but I'm pro reparations. They're West Indian also, but they were born here, so they would. It's an interesting dynamic, and they were more of the idea that, oh, we could just create programs, and I'm like, well, there've been programs for Black people for a while, and those programs always seem to never work out for us as they're supposed to. So in your let's say Sikivu is president, which doesn't sound like a bad idea. Let's say Sikivu is president. How does in your concept, how does reparations work? How does that system work out? What do we do to make that happen? How does that look like?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have a crisis, and I saw a comment from our friend and colleague Cynthia McDonald in the chat. We have a crisis when it comes to home ownership among African Americans. African Americans comprise over 40% of the unhoused population in LA County. And LA County has the dubious distinction of having some of the highest rates of multi-millionaire home ownership, meaning that you have this predatory 1% that are not paying taxes, that are not being charged with redistribution of wealth, and that are basically plantation holders, contemporary plantation holders. So what we need is land. We need equitable access to mortgages that are going to have low interest rates, that are going to allow homeowners not to be ensnared in taxes that are then going to force them into becoming insolvent. When we look at taxation of homeowners, African-American homeowners and other BIPOC homeowners in LA County, the rates are through the roof. And so oftentimes you have homeowners that are struggling, not just to make their mortgage, not just to ensure that their children are fed and are going to school, but to pay these taxes. So there has to be some reckoning with those disparities. In addition to, and this is a broader discussion, we could go on and on, looking at what is going on with our children in schools where they're being taught primarily by white female instructors that view them as criminals, where there is a virtual police state, where they are being detained and criminalized and pushed out in disproportionate numbers, and where they are really being exposed to a curriculum that is indoctrinating them into white supremacy and into invisibility. Yeah. We also need to examine the ways in which Black queer youth, LGBTQ plus and non-binary youth are suffering the brunt of these insidious regimes of power, authority, and control. We know that African American youth who identify as queer are more likely to be harassed, are more likely to be bullied, and, quiet as is kept, more likely to be policed in K through 12 schools, public and private, are more likely to be pipelined into prisons and juvenile facilities at very young ages, in addition to the high rates of homicide, suicide, and suicidal ideation that occur among Black trans youth.
Yeah.
And so certainly, again, circling back to your question, in terms of redress, we need to ensure that there is culturally responsive, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-heteronormative professional development in K through 12 schools, particularly at the elementary school level, because what I'm seeing as a practitioner and an educator and a resource provider in K through 12 schools is that care is not being provided to Black girls who identify as queer, and actually to Black girls who are cis. That care is not being provided. They are not seeing folks in the classroom who look like them, who have their interest at heart, who come from their communities, who have the social capital to be able to navigate a system that is steeped in misogyny with anti-Black misogyny. So there are a number of things that we can be doing, that we are doing, pushing back against these racist, sexist, misogynist school boards, pushing back against these state councils, particularly in the Midwest and in the South, that are imposing these anti-LGBTQ policies to try and shut down LGBTQ and gender expansive affirming care and shut down just basic provision of social and gender justice aligned curriculum for K through 5 youth in these draconian Southern schools. So there are a number of things that can be done.
Yeah, it is definitely not hopeless. Sometimes it just seems a little, it seems like we were dealing with the trans issue, and then they circled back around to Roe v. Wade and caught us from there. And it was just like, what happened? But yeah, it is definitely not hopeless. And there are things, like you said, there are things we can do and things we are doing. One other thing I wanted to bring up with you is that not only are you an accomplished atheist, activist, and author, you're also a musician and playwright. How is that? I mentioned that you play at the last Women of Color conference. You played in Mandisa's song. I actually have a video of that that I posted and shared with Mandisa. How does your the sort of the playwright and the musician side typically interact with the activism side?
And I want to say I have yet to see that video, and I'm really looking forward to revisiting that. So shoot that link to me if you can.
I definitely will. I think we're friends on Facebook, so I definitely will.
Okay, please tag me on that. And then just kudos to Mandisa for initiating that and for her powerhouse vocals and my very modest guitar playing. But yes, as far as that creative aspect is concerned, I mean, that's a very important antidote to a lot of the gravity and a lot of the frankly despair that sometimes that we can be steeped in as Black non-believers, and being isolated, grappling with depression, grappling with other mental health issues, because there is no real explicit real-time community sometimes. And because Black women in particular are at the tip of the spear of this just well of respectability politics, coming from the church and coming from other faith sectors within our communities. So as an artist, as a theater practitioner, as a writer, I try and focus on secular Black women characters, uplifting those voices, uplifting those narratives, uplifting those trajectories of resistance and subjectivity, because we do not see those stories being portrayed within our communities. And we certainly don't see them within a white supremacist, apartheid context. We don't see them within our own communities. And I was trying to think before this show, when was the last time I'd seen an African-American female protagonist portrayed on stage? And I think that it was in the 1959 Raisin in the Sun production with Beneatha Younger, who was a very powerful and outspoken Black woman atheist who defies her mother and gets slapped for it, gets literally like physically assaulted for speaking out against God dogma. So I was inspired by that early on, inspired by that example to push back against it and to try and portray affirming African-American women atheists across the board, in my novels, in my plays, in web series, in other contexts. Because again, these are the subaltern stories that are going to disrupt this narrative that all Black women are steeped in faith, that all Black women are not critically thinking, are not skeptical, and don't have a historical trajectory of skepticism and free thought. And we know that is definitely not the case. I mean, it's been uplifted on this show. It's been uplifted in the literature, the quite expansive and voluminous literature that exists on Black free thought, humanist, and secular traditions, that we have folks like Nella Larson with her landmark 1920s book, Quicksand. Highly recommend. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with Passing, but Quicksand, I mean, I cannot speak highly enough of how seminal that work was, given that we're talking 1928 the Harlem Renaissance and there being no prior depictions of Black women, non-believing, free-thinking, and skeptical protagonists in American literature. And particularly no depictions of a protagonist who is also pushing back against gender conformity in the African American community. So that was also an inspiration for me in my work. The latest play that I put on was called Rock and Roll Heretic, and that was an adaptation of my 2021 novel, trying to get these years together, 2021 novel of the same name. And it was inspired in part by the journey of Rosetta Tharpe, who was a trailblazing African-American woman guitarist, trailblazed on electric distortion, trailblazed on mixing genres. She came from the gospel world, from the sanctified world, the Pentecostal world initially, and then transitioned into playing more secular music and was an icon, was a template for all of these white predators like Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis. And I'm calling them predators because if we're thinking about reparations and we're thinking about the theft of Black cultural production, Black labor, we have to look at the ways in which Black labor and Black cultural production have been extracted over time, appropriated over time by these white supremacist predators in the music industry. And not just individuals, but obviously corporations, generating, multi-billion-dollar empires for non-Black folks. So that is an element of Rock and Roll Heretic, looking at that trajectory of predation, but also looking at her struggles as a Black woman heretic who rejects the traditions of the Pentecostal church, with abuse, with alcohol addiction, and with erasure as an older queer woman betwixt and between, on the road and grappling with this musical legacy that has really been hijacked within mainstream American racial apartheid culture.
Yeah. Mandisa, you're muted.
Okay, I am back. So as you and I have been acquainted, we became acquainted in 2011. We started working more closely together in about 2016, 2017, which has finally resulted in co-producing the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference. And I will just say that it has been an honor, and it has been one of the things that has kept me going in this community, knowing that we are not only redefining the history, that we're bringing it forward, we're disrupting the narrative, or we're helping to disrupt the narrative of what it means to be Black in this country, to be atheist, and to be, pro-Black with all of these factors. What would you say is the most important reason that people, no matter who they are, should support the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference, especially as we are dealing with the overturning of reproductive justice and knowing that it will impact more women of color, particularly Black women?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those are all great points and great questions to pose. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about the explosion of the religious nuns in the demographics of the United States, and the fact that we're seeing small but incremental growth of religious nun identification among African Americans. We know that we're still minuscule when it comes to folks identifying explicitly as atheists, but more of us identify as religious nuns. And I think that these very turbulent and extremely parasitic and violent and terroristic SCOTUS decisions are going to move that needle even more. You have greater numbers of African-American queer youth, Gen Z youth, that are pushing back against this bullshit, frankly, that are organizing against it, that see in a crystal clear way that Christian fascism has a very concrete and very direct and terroristic impact on their bodily autonomy, on their self-determination, on their right to access employment, on their right to access education, on their right to access housing. So I'm hopeful for that, vis-a-vis the support of what we're doing, because I really feel that we have been the bellwether, that we have constantly been raising the flag and sounding the alarm for the coming shitstorm. And now we're here. And all throughout, we've been writing, we've been agitating, we've been organizing and telling folks that this is a clear and present danger to African Americans. It's not just white folks out in the hinterlands. It's not just white women, screaming about handmaidenship and my body, my choice. This has a direct impact on the economic sustainability of Black communities, working class, middle class, upper, it doesn't matter, across the board. So that should be a major catalyst for folks to collaborate with the things that we are trying to do, as folks that have been castigated, have been vilified, have been demonized, since time immemorial, despite the fact that we had so many organizers and historical figures, from Douglass to A. Philip Randolph, to Hubert Henry Harrison, to Hurston, to Hansberry, to James Foreman. The list goes on, that have identified as secular freethinkers. And yet this is an erased history within the American mainstream.
Yeah, it's not a super convenient thing for people to bring up constantly. So it does get erased within mainstream society. But yeah, before we start to wrap up, Sikivu, it was a great talk. Really appreciate having you on the show. Is there anything you have coming up in the very near future that you'd like to promote?
Well, of course, the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference, as Mandisa mentioned, we will be live and we will also be streaming. There will be so many phenomenal speakers and organizers, educators and artists, as well as some young students that we're bringing in to participate in that. I am going to be producing and directing the stage version of White Nights, Black Paradise for the first time in San Francisco. And that is based on my 2015 novel, looking at the trajectory of Black women in People's Temple in Jonestown. That there's another erased and demonized history. The Black women were the majority of those who perished at Jonestown and propped up the People's Temple Church movement. So that is going to debut on the 44th anniversary of the Jonestown Massacre in November.
And where can people find more information on that?
They can find more information at my website. I think that was already put up in the chat comments.
Okay, we'll have that up on the screen again.
On Facebook as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sikivu. I really appreciate you being on the show. It was a great experience, and I definitely look forward to seeing you at Women of Color this September.
Absolutely. Yeah, very excited about that. And thanks so much again, Mandisa, for extending the invitation. And just a shout out to Mandisa. I mean, she does so many phenomenal things, but she also presented at my class in the spring. I'm trying to get all these seasons correct. Pandemic brain. Presented to my class in, I think it was May, right, Mandisa? And talked about her work and her organizing the conference. And so definitely want to have you back in spring of 2023 to speak again to those young people.
I'm here for it. Anytime you need me.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Sikivu.
you both.
Thank you, Sikivu, so much. And also shout out to Bree, Bridget Crutchfield, who I think is on the line and is our organizer for our Detroit affiliate. She's also one of the co-producers of the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference. We are the dream team. We are the ones that make it happen. And I really say that this is this is really a combination of our accomplishments and our challenges in this community. And it's really, really a wonderful event to put on and to also feature the women who are working so hard in this movement, but again, don't get the recognition and the credit they deserve. And also those who are coming up in this movement. So with that, we'll finish out the show here.
Yeah, and Women of Color is great. I've been to many a conference, but Women of Color always feels like more warm, inviting. It's more because it's produced by Black non-believers. It always feels more like home to me for some reason. So I really enjoy it. You guys should check that out. But yeah, we're gonna wrap up the show with a few announcements. What do we have coming up here? The first announcement we have for you is to make sure you guys check out the Where We're Headed podcast, which is a production of our Washington, D.C. affiliate. You can locate that information on where to listen to that at www.podbean.com. That's WWH is in Where We're Headed.podbean.com. So check that out when you get a chance. If you're in the Louisville area, please check out the meetup below, which is a pizza party hosted by the Kentucky Secular Society and co-hosted by the Louisville affiliate. So we'll have that link up for you in the chat as well. Mandisa, you're muted.
I forgot that again. All right. So for those of you who are in the Atlanta area, we will be taking one more group photo shoot at the billboard, which was produced by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. If you hadn't had a chance to check them out in your city, please go to their website to view where they might be. I know there are some other billboards and ads coming up in September, but in the Atlanta area, we will be taking one more video. And yes, after this, at 3:30 Central, 4:30 Eastern Time, I will be on Women Atheists Unload with Cynthia McDonald and Jenna Miu. And myself and Madison Page will be the guests. I will be sharing that on my IG and Facebook again. So please do check. Don't forget to check that out.
Okay. And of course, Mandisa's talk with Houston Oasis is tomorrow. That's July 17th. If you cannot make it in person to Houston, you can tune in online. We'll have the details on the screen of the link of where you can watch that online.
Yes, and as Sikivu said, as we are supporting the younger people, if you are a student or know anyone who attends high school or college, please have them apply, or please apply yourself for the 2022 Hurston Scholarship, of which we are a co-sponsor. This is where a portion of your support goes. It benefits a Black college student or another POC student. The link to apply will be shared in the chat, and the deadline is approaching. It will be July 31st. So please do apply for this scholarship or refer someone to apply for it. Also, we have the Nashville Nuns Convention coming up, which is also known as NanoCon. Will take place on July 30th. Speakers include yours truly, Seth Andrews, Matt Dillahunty, and more. BN still has some sponsored tickets. So if you are interested in attending, this is an in-person event only, but if you are in or near the Nashville area, or if you plan to visit, please do let us know if you would like one of our sponsored tickets. You can go to the website to find out more about the conference. The schedule is being updated regularly.
Okay. Also, Women of Color Beyond Belief is quickly approaching. It's co-organized, of course, by Mandisa, Sikivu, and my favorite, Bridget. So that is quickly approaching. Book your tickets today. Join us in Chicago from September 30th through October 2nd. Speakers include Sunny Secular, Cynthia McDonald, who's on the chat, Nadia Dutchin, Sandria Hall, and many more. Of course, student discounts are available, as well as sponsorship opportunities. We'll have a link up on the screen for that. Also, of course, there's still time to book for BNCCon coming up this November. It's our yearly cruise. Join us for a fun and educational time aboard the Carnival Spirit. You can also sponsor this event. We'll have a link up for you on the screen. And before we wrap up, was there anything else before I get into the wrap up that you wanted to talk about, Mandisa?
Nope. Quickly, please don't forget to donate and to Black Nonbelievers. We appreciate everyone who supported the summer drive. Again, we exceeded our goal in a very short amount of time, but of course, your support is always needed. And don't forget to check out the website to purchase some of our swag. It is, we have very, very cool swag on our website. So definitely check us out, and please do support our organization, as well as Sikivu's with Black Skeptics and the Women's Leadership Project.
Of course. That wraps up this episode of In the Cut. We hope you enjoyed the show and that you'll join us again. As a reminder, we do air every first and third Saturday of each month. Please don't forget to like and spread the word about this video. Of course, you want to follow us on Facebook. That's Black Nonbelievers, Instagram at BNonbelievers Inc., and Twitter at BNonbelievers, capital B, capital N. Subscribe to our YouTube channels. It's just Black Nonbelievers Inc. Find our local affiliate groups on meetup.com. And as Mandisa said, you can make a tax-deductible donation at blacknonbelievers.org. And thank everyone for spreading the word on the Summer Fund Drive. You can also, as Mandisa said, you can also get that swag on our website. We'll have that link is in the chat as well. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again. Thanks. Have a good evening. Oh, Sikivu left. I found that